mynews.studio.
Picture this. Olympic athletes pack up, and just a few months later, their village becomes Milan's largest affordable student housing. But can stadiums or these big event sites really help solve housing crises?
And today is 2025-12-14. Let's unpack what's actually happening in Milan. The Olympic Village for the upcoming Winter Games isn't just a temporary setup for athletes. Instead, Milan's treating it almost like a pilot project. Can a mega event actually trigger a long-term fix for Italy's housing shortage?
Exactly. The site used to be the Porta Romana rail yard, pretty much neglected before this. Now, 6 new blocks and some restored railway buildings are set to host about 1,700 athletes. But just 4 months after the Games, those same beds become student housing. It'll be the biggest single-site student complex in Italy, and 30% of those units are earmarked as subsidized, which means rents about 25% below market.
That's a big shift from what we've seen in places like Athens or Rio, where the buildings ended up empty or underused. But why is Milan treating the Olympics as just phase 1 for these buildings?
It comes down to designing for what happens after the Games. The architects, SOM, working with Italian partners, designed everything to transform easily. For instance, ground floors work as athlete service zones now, but later they'll turn into things like a gym, healthcare offices, cafes, even co-working spaces. There are public paths, green courtyards, sports courts, a central plaza, all meant to connect back into the city.
And on the environmental front, this village is targeting zero operational emissions. Features like prefabricated timber facades, rooftop solar panels producing around 1 megawatt, heat pumps, rainwater reuse systems. They're aiming for LEED Gold certification. That's unusual for Italian public housing, isn't it?
It is. The International Olympic Committee is actually promoting this as a demonstration project. 85% of the events will use existing venues, and the new village is meant to be a permanent upgrade for Milan.
But here's the question. Does that affordability stick around after the Games are over? For now, about 30% of the units will have lower rents for at least 12 years, with public funding from the Ministry of Universities. But beyond that, do we know what happens?
Not in full detail. The city and the investors are suggesting they'll be planning rules or a covenant to keep rents affordable, but the legal details haven't been released yet. The hope is that there'll be long-term oversight, but if you look at history, a lot of projects have lost their social goals over time.
And who exactly gets those subsidized units? It's students now, with likely income checks. But is that the best way to help Milan's lowest income residents? Or does it risk missing the people who need affordable housing most?
That's a real issue. Most of the new beds are reserved for students, but the wider Porta Romana redevelopment does include some broader, affordable housing. Still, there's no guarantee that the poorest Milanese will get access to this particular site. The city's policy is to expand social housing elsewhere too, by requiring it in new developments.
So Milan's trying to address 2 problems at once, the shortage of student housing and the broader affordable housing gap. But does this model actually make a dent in either? I mean, is turning Olympic villages into student housing enough?
It's a significant first step, but probably not a full solution. Milan's being watched as a test case. The IOC is already pointing to this as the new sustainability model for host cities. The buildings are designed to have a second life. But whether that life truly serves those who need it most, that's still to be proven.
And other cities are experimenting too. Colorado, for instance, is using public money for affordable housing around big events. India's piloting cash transfers to women for social equity. There's a wider debate. How do you make sure public investments in these mega events actually benefit communities in the long run?
For Milan, the key will be how well they set up the long-term rules on rent, eligibility, and oversight. Will they continue to monitor rents? Will the city intervene if prices rise? Other host cities could learn from this. Always plan for the second life of every Olympic building.
Which leads to questions from listeners. If Milan can deliver this kind of almost zero emissions housing in just 30 months, Why doesn't this happen outside the Olympic cycle? Should Olympic bids have to prove their villages will reduce local waiting lists or help with student rents?
And is student housing enough? Or should cities be required to guarantee that a portion becomes long-term social housing? These are the kinds of questions that could shape the future of both mega events and urban policy.
To sum up, Milan's Olympic Village is a test. Can cities turn 2 weeks of global attention into decades of public benefit, affordable, sustainable, and truly part of the city? The real legacy depends on what comes next.
Thanks for joining us as we explored Milan's bold housing experiment, a story that's really about much more than just medals or sports.
Thank you for listening. This episode was brought to you by mynews.studio. Try it now for free.